Yeah, it seems like that is an example of smart brevity, where you are where you take away information that most people would think is important, like the year, the specific year. And so in chapter 18 in particular, you praise Axios,
Mhm.
the news provider, on their smart brevity approach to data visualization storytelling. In your view, maybe you can summarize for us the keys to distilling data stories down to their essence.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
is there a process we can follow?
That relates to one of my favorite books about design, which is Simplicity by John Maeda. So in that book is essentially his theory about what simplicity in design is truly about. And there's a great quote from that book that I have cited in some of my books, in which Maeda says, simplicity is about subtracting the obvious and adding the meaningful. That's what it's all about, right? So in some sense, you try to reduce the presentation of the information to its bare bones, to its essence, but you should not go too far into that process. You need to keep that essence. If you reduce too much, then you are going to sacrifice the effectiveness of the graphic. There's a point in which you cannot reduce more. And then you need to also think about whether you should add more to the graphic in order to make the information more understandable. So this probably sounds very vague and very abstract, but we can actually derive some very concrete practice from it. And so whenever I design a visualization myself, I take a look at every single component of that visualization, the axes, the legends, the tick marks, the grid lines, every single object. And I try to make an honest assessment. Does this object fulfill any purpose? Why is this feature of the graphic still on the graphic? Does it make the graphic more understandable, easier to read, or more visually attractive or engaging or whatever? Then I keep that particular feature. But if that particular feature doesn't fulfill any of these purposes, it doesn't make our graphic more understandable or more attractive, more visually striking or whatever, then it doesn't really have a purpose at all, and therefore you can remove it. That is the sort of like the what that principle of simplicity ends up being useful for in data visualization. But again, can we create general principles of graphic simplicity? I don't think that we really can. Every graphic is its own story. Every graphic requires its own assessment, because you need to take into consideration not only what you want to communicate, but also you need to take into consideration the nature of the data. Some data needs more detail in order to be represented accurately. Some data can be represented at higher levels of aggregation, and therefore the graphic can be simpler, right? You need to take into consideration constraints. For example, the size of the platform where the graphic is going to be displayed is not the same thing to create a graphic to be shown on a computer screen than creating the same graphic for a mobile phone. That's a constraint. And you also need to take into consideration the audience, the content, the purpose, the intent, the insights that you want to highlight. All those things need to be mixed up together in order to make the right choices. Or I would say not the right choices, but appropriate choices, depending on what you want to achieve.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of specificity related to exactly what you're trying to achieve, the specific story that you're trying to tell, the particular kind of visualization you're working with. But overall, the idea is to remove elements that are not useful to whatever you're trying to convey.
Or to add elements that may be important
Mm.
to make
Mhm.
the story more understandable. It's not only about reduction. Sometimes it's about augmentation.
That makes sense. Are there situations, are there prominent examples that you're aware of where brevity has gone too far?
Sure. I mean, many graphics that, for example, don't include annotations when they should have included annotations.
Right.
Why do we have you have a line graph and suddenly you see a sudden spike in the line and you don't explain that spike? Readers will immediately be feel prompted to ask, what is going on there? Tell me more. What is going on here? Right? I have plenty of examples of that type of graphic in my previous book, How Chats Lie, right? In which graphics that were not designed with the intention of misleading anybody end up misleading somebody, or at least part of the public, because they tried to reduce the amount of information too much.